Good afternoon. Can y'all hear me? Well, first of all, I'm glad because normally I'm on the air at this time.
Oh, gosh.
So I'm out of the studio. I'm Rose Scott from Public Broadcasting Atlanta, Atlanta's NPR station, Atlanta's only NPR station. So let me just say thank you for allowing me to be a part of this and getting out of the studio. You know, my organization, we recently changed our mission statement, and it was a mission statement of all these bullet points, and we decided that we needed to just kind of compile it all into one line. And that one line was, we inspire a community of lifelong learners. And the reason for that is because we feel in public media, we have a responsibility. We have a commitment. As a journalist, I have a commitment to be honest, to hold folks like these honest and accountable. If you have been listening to this week's news, you know that is something that I do very well, I think. And full disclosure, Public Broadcasting Atlanta has partnered with these two organizations in the past, so I think it's important to let you all know that. And as we discuss the power of public and private partnerships, I can't tell you what to think or how to think. I can just tell you to embrace the information, and then whatever decision you make upon that, think about how it impacts your organizations, think about how it impacts people that don't look like you, people that don't come from the environments like you, and think about how it impacts the quality of life for all of us. And so on that note, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to SunTrust CEO, Bill Rogers.
Thanks. Thank you, Rose, and thanks for those words of encouragement. And you also seem like you put a marker out to keep us honest, so we're gonna be careful. One of our founders at SunTrust really said it right, and it was, when you build your community, you build your bank. And I really don't think it's a lot more complicated than that, and that's a fundamental belief that sort of stayed with us since then. Some of you may know we're involved in a merger with BB&T. This is a critical process in evaluating sort of what is our public-private partnership, how will our two banks work together going forward. And part of that was having community listening sessions, which we participated in, 8 to 10 community listening sessions. And what came out of that for me is this is a unique American experience. This really doesn't exist in the rest of the world like it does in America, this incredible public-private partnership. And then the second thing that came out of it for me is it has to work. Because it's unique and it's critical to how we operate our cities, it actually has to work. SunTrust is a purpose-driven company. We define our purpose as lighting the way to financial well-being. Every morning when I come into work, I see a couple of stats that roll in front of me. More than half of us don't have $2,000 saved for an emergency. That's a critical area. And over 40% don't have $500. Almost 1/3 of Americans don't have anything saved for retirement. So in many ways, this is a fragile recovery, and not everyone is participating in this recovery. And we have to acknowledge that and be part of that. And as a bank, we sort of viewed it as not only an opportunity to help bend that curve, but it's really an obligation to help bend that curve. And let me just give you a couple of examples in Atlanta of the things that we're doing in the public-private side. And I'm sure we're going to talk a lot more about those. Two of our most important public servants in any city are our teachers and our police officers. I mean, they're critical to the success of any city. And they're also those who are at the most risk to financial stress. So in working with Operation Hope, I think you're going to hear from John Hope Bryant later on in this session, we've put in financial coaches in both Atlanta public school systems and the Atlanta Police Department. And the goal is to increase FICO scores, reduce debt, increase savings, and create more confidence and less stress for those that are critical to our city. And to teach young people to help build financial wellness, we've worked closely with Junior Achievement. Literally in this building, 6 years ago, Junior Achievement set a grand vision for building something called Finance Park at the Discovery Center. And this is where now 30,000 middle schoolers come in, and they get to experience sort of the real life world of the decisions that are being made, the trade-offs that are being made every day, and how to run a budget. I was in a Finance Park JA Center not too long ago, and I went over and I introduced myself to a middle schooler, and I said, how are you? And she said, fine, and what her name? And I said, well, what do you do? And she said, I'm the CEO of SunTrust Bank. So it was a real, element. And I said, well, how's it going? And she was making a lot of loans that day at the JA Center. Here in Atlanta, we recently announced a $100 million a year commitment for the next 3 years, which is really just a continuation of the important philanthropic efforts that we've done in this great city. Part of that is a contribution to the West Side Future Fund, which again is sort of right outside this building, created in the ultimate public-private partnership in a community that once had 40,000 vibrant citizens, and today is in great need of revitalization with every component: workforce development, affordable housing, financial wellness, and we want to be part of that. But I've saved my best example for last, and that's our partnership with the Atlanta Braves. This is so much more than naming rights. We never entered into discussion about naming rights. We entered into discussion about sharing purpose and how do we bend the curve, how do we help communities. And this is a 25-year commitment to financial wellness and a strong community. We also help finance the mixed-use development. We were literally involved from day one. And among all the great condos and apartments and restaurants that are there, there's also something called the on-up experience. So where people get an opportunity to come in, maybe have a little bit of fun, but maybe also learn a little about their own personal financial wellness capabilities. We have great partnership with the Braves on a variety of different activities. At any game, at any night, there's something going on together where we're trying to build fan base, build community, and help financial wellness. Fantastic partners. And with that, I think Derek's going to give you a little more introduction to that. So let me introduce our great partner and my good friend, Derek Schiller.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. It's an honor to share the stage with you and Rose. I'll be honest with you. This being called the Smart City Expo and having a team sports guy up here, I thought there might have been a mistake with my invitation to begin with. But in all seriousness, I think what we can do, and I love the focus of this session because we're talking about public-private partnerships. And essentially, and if you don't know the background on this, I'm going to give you a little background behind this public-private partnership that we had in our new ballpark, SunTrust Park. And that partnership is with Cobb County primarily, as well as the Cumberland CID, the Community Improvement District. I'll take you back 5-10 years ago. And we were in a building, and the lease was expiring. It was a great ballpark, Turner Field. And it was relatively close to downtown, but it wasn't necessarily connected to downtown. And we said, in envisioning for the future, what do you want out of a ballpark? And the answer, ironically, started to come from examples of the past. And I think if you were to go around this room, especially the baseball fans, and you said, okay, what are the great ballparks that you've been to? Somebody's inevitably going to mention Wrigley Field or Fenway. And just using Wrigley Field, and I love the Cubs, and I love those guys, I love the organization, except for when we're playing them. But Wrigley Field, the concept of going to a Cubs game is as much about Wrigleyville and what's happening outside of Wrigley Field as it is about Wrigley Field itself. And I think I'll use that example because it really has a lot to do with what we were trying to create in the future, which is talking about the experience. And if you talk about the experience and making sure that the fan is rewarded, the fan is happy, not just on the 81 baseball games, we play 81 home games, 162 total, but also on all the other days of the year. And so when we started to think about, formulate the future ideas, we really got to an innovative place. And it may sound strange coming from a pro sports team guy, but essentially what we said was, for us to deliver the experience, we not only have to deliver the experience in the ballpark where we will play, but we also have to curate immediately outside. And so the public-private partnership is an example of that. We're essentially taking a ballpark and using maybe some examples of the past in a different sector. Let's take malls. The ballpark represents the anchor tenant to this mall, otherwise known as our mixed-use development that we named the Battery Atlanta. And if you think about the mall example, that big giant box retailer, a Nordstrom's, a Macy's, or whatever it is, drives lots of people into that environment, and everybody kind of benefits from that. In some ways, the ballpark does that for the Battery Atlanta. But also, the Battery has to stand on its own. Bill mentioned a couple of the aspects to our mixed-use development. Just for awareness, it includes 550 apartments, a 4-star full-service hotel called the Omni, a lot of retail, about 350,000 square feet of retail and restaurant space, an office building, which we've got in partnership with Comcast, and more offices, and we're building even more. In fact, initially, our investment was about $600 million. And the innovation concept is that we agreed and essentially were required to build that mixed-use development as a part of, as a condition of, having a public-private finance partnership on the ballpark itself. So the ballpark is a $672 million facility. And we have about a 55% requirement on that, with the county and the CID, the revenue sources, contributing about 45%. Now, that unto itself, if you were to put a circle around just that, and you were to place that in a different community, and you were not to do that with the mixed-use development requirement, I think there's an argument to say that that's a bad idea, and that doesn't work. And we've seen that in other places. And there's many examples where municipalities, it didn't work. The real essence to this, and the reason why this works, is because of the Battery driving 365-day-a-year opportunity. The screen kind of shows you up in the upper left an example of what that real estate looked like before we got going. It was essentially a wooded, empty land. Ironically, it sat in a great intersection of Atlanta where 75 and 285 merged together. So it's got great transit options. Easy places, ingress, egress ways to get to. And the reason why it wasn't really built on, just as a side note, was because there were pipelines that transversed it. Now, we worked with the pipeline companies in relocating those, and realistically, that wasn't that big of a deal as long as we were writing the check for that. The ballpark represents about 15 acres of what is ultimately about a 90-acre facility. The first phase of which, is, as I said, is about $600 million, representing about 1.5 million square feet. And we're already on a phase 2, which includes at least another $300+ million of investment, which is in the form of an office building in partnership with a German conglomerate called ThyssenKrupp, as well as other components that make up the Battery Atlanta. The result are some of the numbers that you can see on the screen. The easy way to look at this, right, is what was the real estate generating in taxable revenue at the beginning of this? It was a few $100,000. By the time that we are up and running, and granted, we don't even have that fully baked yet because, as I said, we're still building, but Georgia Tech did a fiscal impact study last year, so not while we were even fully built. And the result of that was that we were returning taxable dollars into the county and the municipalities around there to the tune of at least $18 million. Now, within a few years, we actually think that the public commitment side is actually going to be less than the taxable revenue side. So this turns the whole model on its heels. The other thing is this concept, and I think it's also been misaligned, is if you build it, they will come. And usually what's said is if you build a sports facility in a municipality, then you're going to get lots of other activity that comes as a result. Well, if all you're doing is just a sports facility, again, I don't think that works. But if you also build all of this other infrastructure and you make it an entertainment destination, not just for those 81 days, but for 365 days, well, we've proven out that that does happen. And in fact, the Cumberland District, which is a submarket of Atlanta, which is where this is located, didn't have a single Class A office building that was built there in the last 20 years. Since we announced our project, they've had 6. There's been $5 billion of new taxable base that's come into that Cumberland submarket. So we love the fact that this business model is being studied, and in fact have about 100 teams, municipalities from all across the country, in fact the globe, that are coming in and taking a look at this. And we think this is a perfect example. When you do it right, it's going to work. It wasn't easy along the way. We had great help with SunTrust. You know, they were solid backers. They understood the vision. They understood what we were trying to do. We had great help with Comcast, who deployed lots of infrastructure in the form of technology in addition to being a tenant of ours. And the result is a great experience. I encourage you to come. We got 8 games to win the National League East. So everybody here who wasn't a Braves fan before, you've heard my speech, now you're a Braves fan. Postseason tickets are going to be on sale soon, and I look forward to seeing you. Thank you very much. And Rose, I think it's time for our fireside chat. Oh, yeah. So we don't have a fire, but let's chat.
Well, first of all, I'm from St. Louis, so there ain't room for the Braves.
Come on.
Well, the Cardinals
Should
number
I move
one.
or something? Is this
You might want to, Bill. Cardinals are number 1 in their division, by the way. I think y'all can clap for that. Oh, come on. You all gave great examples of what the end result of a public-private partnership. But I think it's important for the audience to know how you got there. You know, you've presented this great meal, but we need to talk about the ingredients that go into it. So I want to begin by asking you, from your respective organizations, what do you look for in that partnership? You know, what are those indicators for you to assess this is a good idea? Bill, I'll start with you.
I think it has to be, and we both talked, and you started from purpose, and we both started talking from purpose. I think it has to actually align with your company's mission and values and the things that you want to accomplish. And when someone comes to us and says, oh gosh, well, we want money for X, that's not a great place to start. But when it comes to us and says, let's actually form a partnership, let's talk about how we're going to, in our case, bend the curve related to financial wellness. What can we do together? What are the strategies? How can we make 2 + 2 = 5? How can we expand that? So I think it's critical that the partnerships have to start not economically. Those will work, but they have to start sort of from purpose, that you have full alignment. I mean, I love Derek and his team. They can say lighting the way to financial well-being faster than I can quote baseball stats. You know, so I mean, but it's all about building the right kind of partnership grounded in purpose.
Derek?
You know, in our case, we were in effect on the hunt for a municipality that was looking to see the vision that we had. And I would say great public partnerships start with having a champion. In the case of Cobb County, it was a gentleman who was part of the leadership of Cobb County by the name of Tim Lee. And you know, it's going to take somebody who sees the same vision as you and is willing to take some risks. I think that was, for us, one of our keys.
So let me ask you this, because you have 2 entities. You also are beholden to your own individual stakeholders as well, shareholders. So how do you maneuver through, yes, there's a shared interest, but also how do you maneuver through possibly any challenges that might come up, because everyone from this camp may have well, let's make sure we get the better deal, or someone says, well, make sure our interests are also going to be tiered, maybe above. How do you work through that?
You know, look, I think it takes some intestinal fortitude in these projects. When we moved, we were moving from a partnership that was really inside of City of Atlanta, tied to Turner Field, that included the city and Fulton County, to a different municipality. And so there's inevitably going to be, for lack of a better way of saying it, some hard feelings about that. I think it's sometimes difficult to fight your way through it, but you have to see that the end goal, the end game, is very much worth it. And keeping your eye on what that end game is, and not letting some of the, in our case, the very public perceptions of things override what the challenge really is.
And Rose, I would say more globally, and I think you've really asked the question the right way. And you know, the Business Roundtable has really expanded its scope of thinking about the concept of stakeholders versus shareholders. And I really embrace that concept, because I don't think you can serve your shareholders if you're not serving your stakeholders. And the stakeholders are broader. I mean, they're your community. It's just a bigger concept. So I think keeping that as a larger concept than a more narrow concept, I think allows you to create those partnerships and gets the ultimate support.
Derek, I want to go back to you for a moment, because as you know, when the announcement was made, transparency was something that came up People like me said, hey, where was the transparency? You know, how do you address that? Do you all talk about that?
Well, look, you know, one of the things that I think sometimes gets confused is that we are in a elected democracy. And when you do so, you're entrusting elected officials to represent the interests of the citizens. And so for us, we were working with who the elected officials were that were representing the community. And, you know, I think while there was some debate, if you will, or some discussion about this concept of transparency, the fact of the matter is in many of these public-private partnerships, not just here, but throughout the country or the world, it really takes a degree of having private discussions so that you can fully vet out all of the different issues. If you do these completely out in the open and you're essentially, you know, inviting the public in as you're making the sausage, it's not going to look nearly as good as what the end result is. And so I would like to believe that we can all give that a chance. And in our case, I'm glad that's the way that happened. It was not a part of a referendum, no, but the fact of the matter is the Cobb County Commissioners all voted on this, so it was a voted on opportunity. And again, I think there was a wise choice that's really reaping rewards in Cobb County. Any
lessons learned, though? Any not necessarily regrets, but anything that you could think of that y'all might have done in a different mode?
Well, if we were doing that discussion, we'd probably be here a lot longer. But I would say this is like, the end result here, going back to what I said earlier, the end result guided us. And as we sit here today, I'm very proud of, I think I'd safely speak for Bill in saying anybody who has touched this project's very proud of where it's ended up. You know, how we got there, some of the little wiggles and waggles along the way, sure, you know, could we have done a little bit differently? But at the end of the day, I'm really proud of where we ended up and how we got there. And I think it's a terrific opportunity to review a public-private partnership that's done right.
Bill, transparency? Your thoughts on that?
Related to this specifically, I would echo what Derek said, and then similarly, because we just talked about this, is the ability to work closely together and define the partnership together. That part about aligning with your purpose and aligning on what you want to do, that takes work. And being able to do that, and not behind closed doors, because I don't think that's what's implied, but being able to do that in a collaborative manner to get a really strong outcome, I think is actually important to having a really good public-private partnership.
So then how do you maneuver through scrutiny then? How do you all work through that? I mean, both entities have to be, I guess, in a sense, on one accord. Bill?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that we found, and again, I don't want to make an assumption that everybody in this room understands all the different steps that we had taken and all what happened, but there was a lot of the challenge in today's environment, and I'm respectful of you asking the question when I say this, is that these situations are oftentimes not fully based. When I say these situations, the ability for the public to see these, they're not fully based in all of the facts. Mm-hmm. If we had an opportunity once a month throughout this process to stand in front of this room and every other room and basically uncover all the facts of the process, I think everybody would have a much better understanding. But we were relying upon lots of others, the constituents, the media, to basically transmit what it is we were doing. And in certain situations, I think those agendas took over. And part of it I can understand, right? There's an emotional attachment to sports facilities in particular. And so we were leaving one sports facility where you had all these great moments that occurred. You know, we won the World Series. We you know, had all these great division championships and LCSs that occurred in Turner Field. All these great moments and memories for people. And we were moving 10 miles up the road to a different part of Atlanta and further away from some people, but closer to the majority of our fans. And that's an emotional type of situation. And so I guess, you know, the thing that I would say is, for us, We knew that from the beginning, and we were prepared to deal with those emotions. And hopefully now some of the memories that people are making at SunTrust Park are overriding any of the things that they may have thought about as part of the process.
Bill, want anything?
Well, I think Derek said it well in the sense that, and unique to the sports franchises, we're all shareholders. We view ourselves as shareholders of the Atlanta Braves. And then to your other point on the, part of leadership is being second guessed. I mean, if you're not willing to be second guessed, you're never going to be a leader. And as long as you stay on that North Star, if your North Star is the right North Star and you know you're doing the right thing and you know you're doing it for the right reasons and you know when you get to the outcome that you can lay your head on your pillow at night and know you've done it the right way, then you just have to be willing to accept being second guessed.
Of course, if the Braves win the World Series, that might make everybody happy, right?
It makes it a lot easier. That's why I'm happy to be having this conversation when we're leading the NL East and we're on the cusp of winning the division. So makes it a little easier.
I was only concerned that she said if.
She is a St. Louis fan after all. She's got to hold that on.
Atlanta and the Atlanta region has enjoyed this great economic boom since the Olympics. Technology, we did a series on Closer Look about Atlanta's this big tech mecca. Development, obviously, we have great universities and colleges, but there's still some issues. Atlanta is still #1 in income inequality. Right. You look at some of the issues with some of our public schools, gentrification issues. When you all are making these decisions in terms of public-private partnerships, are you also taking into consideration what this will do, as I mentioned in my opening, how this impacts the quality of life for everyone? Do y'all take that into consideration?
Yeah, I was going to say absolutely. I mean, it has to be. And if Atlanta has, and a lot of major cities, and particularly those in the Southeast, we have real challenges on the social mobility and income and inequality side. And it doesn't work unless it works for everybody. And if you don't have that mentality, then I really don't think you ought to be in the leadership position. So we have to invest in things to make sure that everybody's benefiting from that. So whether it's workforce development, whether it's affordable housing, and being strategic about those investments to make sure that they have the impact and that they're moving. Because a great city is when everyone benefits at a great city, not when there's haves and have-nots. It just doesn't work.
Derek.
Yeah, actually, this is one we get really, really proud of, and I spoke to it a little bit earlier in that the taxable revenue in our area and for that piece of property went from a few $100,000 all the way up to 18 million this past year, again, without everything being fully built out and occupied yet. So that means 14 million of which went to the Cobb County school systems. So it's one of those where you can have tangible results that's working directly for the benefit of the community. Now, that's Cobb County. Atlanta is a metropolitan area that's about 6.5 million people. Believe it or not, city of Atlanta is 450,000 people. Cobb County, 750, approaching 800,000 people. This is the way that we like to look at this is while the public-private side of this is definitely with Cobb, and they're the beneficiaries of that because they took the risk in that, understandably so, and that's the right way to look at that. We represent all of Atlanta. And, whenever I get an opportunity to speak in these types of settings, one of the things that I think is really important to remind ourselves as well as everybody that we can work with on this is that these metropolitan areas are made up of lots of different municipalities. And if we can find a way through our community impact to bring people together and to not see things in just their individual silos, then I think that's yet another opportunity for success. A good example of that happening here in Atlanta, and I'm sure it's an issue that's facing lots of public municipalities, is transit. We're gonna raise our hand and really strongly support multifaceted transit throughout this region. It's an issue that's facing Atlanta, as you very well know, and we've got to solve it. And so from our pulpit and our ability to talk to people, we're going to do just that. And that's part of the role that we should and will be playing.
When we started this conversation, I asked you, Derek, about lessons learned. But I think for the audience, what advice do you give to them, not only just the civic leaders here, but also business leaders here? What advice do you give to them about what should go into making a decision about an impactful, as you all put it, powerful public-private partnership.
I think it goes back to what I said earlier. I think you have to be aligned around a common vision and a common view. You have to have either the most narrow around that, or certainly the broadest in terms of who you impact. But you have to be strategic, and you have to have an outcome and a desire of what you want to have happen in that process. And as I said, anytime that we talk to someone about philanthropy, it always has to start strategic. And it always has to start from a purpose orientation. It has to start from how does it benefit, and can you scale it, and what will be the pebble in the pond impact of what we do. So I think you start strategic, start gained with purpose, have a North Star, and measure the results.
Derek?
I couldn't agree more. One thing I would add is, and again, I was trying to hopefully represent this in what I spoke about, is you have to be innovative.
Yeah, that's another one. Yeah.
You know, the concept of taking what was done 10 years ago, 50 years ago in the way of how public-private partnerships worked should not be the model moving forward. Okay. This example, it should be studied. We're an open book on it. You know, come take a look at it, poke holes, whatever you want. But it's a completely innovative model to how public-private partnerships work. We think it's working. Cobb County thinks it's working. The constituents think it's working. It's great for our fans. You know, there's hardly a downside, if you will. I can't find one. And yet, what this wasn't done before. Yeah. So it took a little bit of innovation. In our part, it took risk. I mean, we had to deploy significant amounts of capital, which we, you know, got help from our friends on getting some capital deployed, and
you know you have to give it back.
I do know that. Okay. Apparently, you got to give it back with a little bit more money with it.
Make sure we got that straight.
You have the balance owed with you.
But it's those things. I mean, that innovation is what it's going to take. And you know, again, I would say we've gotten visited by a lot of people. I think these kinds of examples, and there are probably others that are out there, but I don't know those as well. This example is working, and if you're in the opportunity to talk to a sports team who says keywords like, we're interested in real estate development, you should say, maybe there's an innovative approach to public-private partnership.
Before we let you all go and we wrap up, I want to individually get your thoughts on leadership. You know, my senior producer's here somewhere, Candace, and one of my favorite movies is Remember the Titans, and one of my favorite lines from that movie is attitude reflects leadership. Y'all know, remember that part?
Absolutely.
So your leadership, Bill, how did you see your leadership in public-private partnerships with SunTrust?
I think it has to be purposeful, so it's always grounded. I'm never confused about what the goal is and what we want to accomplish. So I think it just has to start with that strong grounding and purpose. And people who know me and who work with me, I don't think they're confused about that. And I think part of being an important leader is to clearly articulate where you stand, why you stand there, and not that that's exclusive of others, but so people will know what to expect and how they'll interact.
Listening. You know, I always talk about the importance of listening as a journalist. Yeah. Do you talk about that too?
Oh gosh, if you start with you're the smartest person in the room, you will be the dumbest person in the room. So I think, you know, clearly I have a lot of teammates sitting here on the front row who are giving me great advice, and
are they getting a raise? They're all smiling.
Well. They're all smiling because they know the door's open, and they know their advice is welcome, and they know their advice is important. So you absolutely have to be willing to be challenged and be in a challenging environment. I mean, I view my job as being I'm the chief challenger and I'm the chief cheerleader. Okay. And I've got to have both of those at the same time.
Derek, leadership.
I have a quote that I believe is anonymous. I don't know who it's from, but I think it exemplifies a little bit of how I view leadership. It says, either take responsibility for the way things exist today, or take responsibility for making the change. And essentially, what I see that to mean is you empower your people to make the change that's necessary to grow your business. I think that's more possible in a company that has good culture. You know, SunTrust talked a lot about the culture of their organization. Actually, when we got together, it was one of the fundamental things that we spoke about first before we talked about our partnership, was how our two cultures would relate together. And they've worked together great. Our culture is something that we have to make sure drives the day. Because if you have the right culture, then the leadership of doing the change, doing the innovation will be embraced and accepted. And that's the case. You know, you wouldn't necessarily think this per se, but one of the key brand attributes of the Braves, right? When you think about the Atlanta Braves, and if I was to take all Braves fans and I was to say, let's identify 3 or 4 or 5 key words of the Atlanta Braves, one of the things that comes up is how we care about you, that we're welcoming, that we take care of you, that people feel like they are part of us. And we take that very seriously. You know, lots of different ways in which that comes out, and I think having that caring, nurturing culture where you're facilitating people to have the innovation and the ability to make changes is ultimately what can drive the day. And it can happen in any environment or any company. I mean, I'm talking to you about a sports team, and you probably wouldn't normally think about it in a sports team environment.
Looking to the future and the impact of public and private partnerships, do y'all want to make an announcement about anything else y'all got going on that we don't know about?
I think
I know you like to keep stuff secret there, Derek.
we're private, not secret. We've probably done enough announcing for the next 20 years or so.
I think we've done enough announcing on our own as well, by the way. So.
Let's talk about the future. How do you see the philosophy, the ideology, and then the execution behind public and private partnerships and its impact on this region here in Atlanta?
Let's see. I'll go back to this point of we want to try to embrace all these different constituents out there, whether they be politicians or others, and try to align them. I think in today's environment, which is sometimes probably easy, all of us can agree on, is frustrating regardless of which side you're rooting for in the political spectrum. We've got to figure ways to work together to solve some of these issues. I mean, the concepts that are facing us or facing Cobb affect everybody else in this region, affect everybody else in this state, this multi-state area in many cases. And I like to believe that we can come together a little bit better than we have.
I think we just have to not be afraid to talk about what works and what doesn't, because not everything works. And it may be a great attempt, and it may be something that we think we're excited about, but we have to really pull back up and say what really works, and how does it work, and how does it work at scale. Innovation is really easy, small. Innovation at scale is really hard. Innovation at scale with real results is even harder. And so I think we've just got to make sure that we keep that focus.
Bill Rogers.
Great, thank you.
Derek Schiller, thank you so much.
Thank you
all.
Thanks, Fred.
Thank you, friend.